This is Mac OS Ken.
Pronouncements on iPhone production, two tales of Apple retail and worker unions, and more on Apple's advertising pause on Twitter. It is Tuesday, the 6th of December, 2022. I'm Ken Ray, and this is news from Mac OS Ken, brought to you by yours truly and supported by people like you, patrons through Patreon. Find out more and add your support at patreon.com/MacOSKen. Given the number of times over the past month that Foxconn has started, stopped, and restarted hiring at its iPhone City plant in Zhengzhou, China, it's hard to get too excited about positive comments from the company. And yet the world was treated to a few of those on Monday. Mac Rumors highlights a Reuters report that seemed to include official and unofficial comments from Apple's contract manufacturing partner. On the unofficial, Reuters had a Foxconn source saying the situation has stabilized in reference to protests in Zhengzhou and the government's easing of COVID restrictions. According to the source, the local government is actively helping with the resumption. The capacity is now being gradually resumed with new staff hiring underway. If the recruitment goes smoothly, it could take around 3 to 4 weeks to resume full production. Yeah, keep making your "if it goes smoothly" comments. Assuming things do go smoothly, that would put operations back to rights at the end of December or the first part of January. As for official comments, a statement from Foxconn said presently, the overall epidemic situation has been brought under control, with November being the most affected period. The company added that recruitment is once again underway and that it is gradually restoring production capacity to normal. Now, Apple watchers are just left to wonder how abnormal things actually got. Well, that and whether things will go as smoothly as Foxconn's predicting. On assessing abnormality, I told you yesterday of Evercore analyst Amit Daryanani's stated belief that Apple will have missed between 5 million and 8 million iPhone units once the December quarter is done. His numbers are actually pretty positive compared to his compatriots. He says consensus is calling for a miss of about 10 million units, while the more bearish of the bunch see a miss as high as 15 million. Surprisingly, it is between those numbers that we find one of the most bullish Apple analysts out there. Apple 3.0 ran part of a note Monday from Wedbush analyst Daniel Ives. In it, he put himself in that bad to worse range, anticipating iPhone shortages between 10 million and 15 million units in this all-important holiday season. While his missing Christmas expectations are worse than Daryanani's, he agrees with the Evercore analyst that these will end up being sales deferred, not sales lost. Quoting Ives' note, "We estimate demand versus supply from consumers around iPhone 14 Pro today are currently a 3-to-1 ratio, as many Apple stores, retailers, and online channels are looking empty-handed for most iPhone 14 Pro models until at least early to mid-January. We could see some consumers trade down to the base model iPhone 14 or iPhone 14 Plus. However, our expectation is that roughly 10 million to 15 million iPhones, and potentially more, will move from the December quarter into the March quarter as supply starts to ramp back up over the coming weeks, assuming no more China shutdowns and protests." Yeah, you just keep saying that stuff out loud, why don't you? Interestingly, the thrust of his note was not about current quarter iPhone expectations. It was largely centered on last weekend's Wall Street Journal piece that had Apple telling suppliers to prep for more production outside of China. Bottom line, it will not be simple, but it will be doable. Quoting his note again, "The shift out of China will not be easy and come with clear logistical, engineering, and infrastructure hurdles as the aggressive move to India and Vietnam now begins with the Apple ecosystem alerted. We believe by 2025 or 2026, if Apple moves aggressively, more than 50% of iPhone production could come out of India and Vietnam versus single digits today." Mr. Ives has an outperform rating on Apple shares. His price target on the shares is $200. iPhone is not the only thing Apple makes in China, so of course it is not the only thing Apple might like to make someplace else. CNBC says the Cupertino company has talked with officials in India about moving at least some iPad production to the subcontinent. The site cites two unnamed sources close to the Indian government, saying India is exploring options to bring some of Apple's iPad production to the country from China. While discussions are said to be ongoing, the piece says no official deal has been reached. Apple declined to comment for the CNBC piece. Last week, the Apple-watching world expected Apple Pay to launch in South Korea. Didn't happen, and you can blame red tape. On the 29th of November, a piece from 9 to 5 Mac had a local bank announcing that its customers would be able to use Apple Pay starting the 30th of November. Now a piece from Apple Insider says last week's anticipated launch was delayed by a last-minute regulatory review. The piece has South Korea's Financial Supervisory Service saying there's something they are looking into as part of the review, which needs to be completed before the review ends. The piece is unclear, though, on what the FSS is investigating specifically. Despite the regulatory slowness, Apple Insider says there is still an expectation for Apple Pay to arrive in South Korea by the end of December at the earliest, or in early 2023. Two opposing tales of Apple and unionization efforts today, both from our friends at Bloomberg. The first has the National Labor Relations Board saying the Cupertino company's anti-union tactics in Atlanta were illegal, while the second has retail workers in St. Louis saying, "Why would we want a union?" Quoting the first story, U.S. Labor Board prosecutors have determined that Apple violated federal law by interrogating and coercing employees in Atlanta. The National Labor Relations Board's Atlanta Regional Director also concluded that Apple held mandatory anti-union meetings during which management made coercive statements and will issue a complaint if the company does not settle. The piece has the Communications Workers of America, or CWA, the organization that represented Atlanta retail workers in their attempt to unionize, saying in a statement, Apple executives think the rules don't apply to them. Holding an illegal, forced captive audience meeting is not only union busting, but an example of psychological warfare. We commend the NLRB for recognizing captive audience meetings for exactly what they are, a direct violation of labor rights. Monday's move by the NLRB may begin a journey with many steps. Bloomberg says complaints by the NLRB regional directors go to the NLRB judges for consideration. Decisions by those judges can be appealed to the NLRB members in D.C. After that, they can go to federal court, assuming Apple doesn't settle. On the same day that the NLRB says Apple was up to no good in trying to thwart union plans, a group of retail workers who had been considering union seemed to have had a really swift about-face. Quoting the other Bloomberg report, Apple retail employees pushed back on unionization efforts at a location in St. Louis, with staffers saying they don't want to be represented by the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, or IAM, a labor group that recently attempted to organize this store. According to a petition that workers are filing with the National Labor Relations Board, 66 of the store's 90 employees, nearly three-quarters, have rejected the IAM, saying they do not want to join the union and do not support the union in any manner. The IAM dropped its unionization efforts in late November, around the same time retail workers started collecting anti-union signatures, according to the report. At the same time, the IAM blamed anti-union practices and increased hostility toward workers. According to a statement from the employees on Monday, the reality is much simpler. The majority of employees at this Apple store do not wish to work with the IAM. The majority of workers at the St. Louis Galleria Apple store do not believe a union is required at this time, nor do they wish to work with the IAM in the future. According to the employee's statement, according to Bloomberg, workers said they didn't feel the union would provide anything complementary to Apple's culture and existing benefits, and that some felt misled after initially giving support to the group. Are you like me? Do you wonder who organized that statement? We have, it seems, gotten to the bottom of the Apple-Twitter advertising mystery. Of course, you remember the tempest in a tweet started by Twitter owner Elon Musk last week. Offering no proof, Musk took to Twitter saying, "Apple has mostly stopped advertising on Twitter. Do they hate free speech in America?" It was not assertion, with some prominent Apple bloggers pointing out that Apple ads actually appeared on Twitter next to Musk's tweets bashing Apple that day. Additionally, the Gizmodo piece had the ad analytics firm Pathmatics indicating that Apple spent close to $85,000 on Twitter ads that day. The day before that, the Cupertino company spent nearly $105,000, according to the firm. For the month of November, Pathmatics says Apple spent a little over $1 million on Twitter ads, more than October's $989,000. And yet, a piece from Ars Technica says Apple did pause advertising for a period in November, though it had nothing to do with Musk and nothing to do with free speech. According to Ars, Apple pulled its ads after the mass shooting at the LGBTQ+ nightclub, Club Q in Colorado Springs. That tragedy left 5 people dead and several injured. Quoting Ars Technica, 2 former Twitter employees told the New York Times that the tech company was protecting its brand by ensuring that Apple ads wouldn't appear next to news reports of the mass shooting. So, well done, Elmo. And finally today, there is a trailer out for the 4th and final season of the Apple TV Plus M. Night Shyamalan series Servant. It's really hard to tell you anything about it without giving anything away. The press release is up now on Apple's site. Seasons 1, 2, and 3 are available to stream now on Apple TV Plus. Season 4 premieres in the first part of January. And you can, of course, catch the Season 4 trailer on YouTube. Today on the Mac Observer's Daily Observations podcast, TMO Managing Editor Jeff Butts and I talk the current and future state of iPhone production and Mr. Musk's advertising mess. That is all today on the Daily Observations podcast from the Mac Observer, online at macobserver.com or wherever you get podcasts. macOS Ken, brought to you by me and supported by people like you, patrons through Patreon. Find out more and add your support at patreon.com/macOSKen. Advertising handle by Backbeat Media, online at backbeatmedia.com. You can reach me a couple of ways. Info at macosken.com or call 716-780-4080. Until next time, that is news from macOS Ken. I'm Ken Ray.
Ciao.